Hello there, and welcome to Sleepy Cosmos channel. Tonight, the question sitting on the table in front of us is this: how can something so far away, so old, so impossibly hot, become the very thing that helps you rest? 7 kinds of stars fill the universe, and yet you have never needed to hold that number in your mind before falling asleep. Tonight, you don't need to hold it at all. Somewhere above the roof, past the traffic and the streetlights, an enormous unlit table stretches out in the dark, and on it, scattered without any order at all, 7 candles are burning, each one its own color, each one lit for a different reason, none of them urgent, none of them waiting on you. We have 4 slow regions to drift through tonight, and you can let all 4 go, because I will carry them for you. First, we sit down at the table itself, in the plain dark, and learn what a star actually is, and why one candle burns gold while another burns blue. Then, we lean in close to the smallest flames on the table, the patient, unhurried ones, the brown and red and yellow candles that outnumber every other light in the room, and simply keep burning, longer than anyone could stay awake to watch. After that, we drift further down the table to the tallest candles, the ones that burn so bright and so briefly, and the wide, tired, reddened ones that have begun to lean and spread like wax pooling across a saucer. And last, we sit with the candles that have already gone out, the embers left behind, and with the long line of people across human history who lay back exactly like you and simply watched, learning over centuries to give each flame its name. If this kind of night has been useful to you, a like or a subscribe helps the channel reach other people who are also lying awake somewhere right now, staring at their own version of the ceiling. But that is only if you feel like it. Nothing here asks anything of you. There is nothing here to hold on to, and nothing here you need to remember by morning. Let your shoulders ease down into whatever is underneath you. Let your jaw unclench. Let your hands go heavy and warm. Let your breathing find its own low rhythm without your help. The table is very far away and very safe, and every candle on it has been burning for longer than you can imagine, without once needing anyone to watch. Settle in. Let's begin. Let the evening close its hand around you now, a curtain drawn without a sound, and let your shoulders find the shape of the ground beneath them. You are settling into a hillside, dark and easy under your back, grass cool as a held breath. The day's warmth still rising faintly out of the earth beneath you like something exhaling after a long errand. Somewhere behind you, unseen, insects keep their own small, patient rhythm, a sound so steady it stops being a sound at all and becomes simply part of the air. And above you, the sky has opened itself the way it does only on the clearest nights. No clouds, no haze, just the deep hush of space laid bare from one edge of the world to the other. You do not need to do anything here. You do not need to understand anything yet. You only need to lie back, let your eyes adjust, degree by degree, until what looked like empty black begins to reveal itself as something crowded, something patient, something that has been waiting for you this whole time without knowing your name. Somewhere above the tree line, one point of light steadies itself into view first, then another, then a scatter of them, until the whole sky seems to lean down toward you the way a face leans down toward a cradle. There is no wind to speak of tonight, only the faint pull of gravity holding you against the hill the same way it holds every one of those distant points of light against the dark, each in its own place, each exactly where it means to be. And here is where tonight's story begins, not with facts, not yet, but with a picture. One simple picture we will carry all the way through, until sleep finds you, however long that takes, and there is no hurry in that at all. Imagine, if you will, that the universe is a table. Not a small table, not a table you could ever walk around in one lifetime, but a table so vast that light itself takes years, centuries, sometimes far longer, just to cross from one edge of it to another. A table set in darkness, stretching further than any hillside view could ever show you. Though tonight, this hillside is enough. Tonight, this hillside is your seat at it. And across that table, spaced out through the dark like something arranged with great care long before you arrived, there burn candles. Not 2 or 3. 7 candles, each lit in its own color, each burning by its own private rhythm, each one a different kind of star. You do not have to picture them clearly yet. Let them stay soft-edged, half-formed, the way a room stays half-formed in the moment just before you open your eyes in the morning. Tonight, we are going to lean in close to each of these 7 flames, one at a time, unhurried, and let their warmth reach you the way warmth reaches skin, not as information to memorize, but as something felt, something absorbed, something that settles into you the way heat settles into stone after a long afternoon and lingers there long after the sun has gone. So let us simply name them here, at the start, the way you might name 7 old friends before a long evening together, without yet telling their stories. There is a candle at the table that never quite caught, a flame that gathered and almost lit, and then settled instead into a low glow that will outlast nearly everything else here, patient in its almost burning. There is a small red flame beside it, modest and unassuming, the kind of light you might walk past without a second glance, and yet there are more of this kind scattered across the table than any other. Small red flames outnumbering all the rest combined, each one steady, each one in no rush to spend itself. Further along sits a yellow flame, warm and familiar in a way the others are not, the kind of glow that feels less like starlight and more like an afternoon you remember from childhood, sun on the back of your hand, sun in the folds of a blanket left out to dry. This one, more than any other tonight, already knows you, and past that yellow flame, further down the table, there rises something fiercer, a blue flame, tall and bright and hot enough that its light seems almost to hum, burning so brightly that it cannot help but burn itself out far sooner than its quieter neighbors. Though tonight there is nothing frightening in that, only a kind of grand, generous urgency, like a candle lit for a celebration rather than an ordinary evening. Beside the blue flame, or perhaps a little further on, there is a candle that has swollen, grown so large it no longer looks like the tidy point of a flame at all, but something billowing, something that has spread outward the way steam spreads from a cup left uncovered, vast and soft-bordered, and strangely tender for something so enormous. It is not a young flame, this one. It is a flame remembering itself, easing outward the way a held breath finally eases out of a chest, and there is nothing alarming in its size, only a kind of grand unfolding, patient and unhurried, the last long chapter of a very long story. And near it, tucked almost out of sight, there is a candle that has already finished its burning, and yet somehow still glows. A small white ember, dense and faint, the leftover warmth of a flame that used to be so much larger than the tiny light it has become, cooling now at its own unhurried pace, in no rush to go dark. And last, hardest to see, hardest to imagine, there is one more, a strange, dense spark, so tightly wound upon itself that a piece of it no bigger than a sugar cube would outweigh a mountain, spinning sometimes with a rhythm so precise it could set a clock by it, faint and far away. And yet, if you listen with more than your ears, somehow steady. The flame that never lit, the small red flame, the yellow flame like our own, the fierce blue flame, the swollen red flame, the white ember, the strange dense spark, 7 candles, 7 kinds of star, each one waiting its turn on the table tonight. You do not need to hold all 7 names at once. Let them drift. Let them blur together into one general sense of light and distance and time. Because before the night is through, we will visit each candle in turn, one by one. And by then, their names will not feel like names you learned so much as places you have already been. There is no test at the end of this. There is nowhere you need to arrive by a certain hour. If your eyes grow heavy before we reach the 3rd candle, or the 5th, that is not a failure of attention. That is, in fact, exactly what this hillside is for. The stars will keep burning at their own unhurried pace, whether you are awake to watch them or not. They have been doing this for longer than there have been eyes on any hillside anywhere to look up and wonder. So let your breathing find its own rhythm now, something like the tide, in and out, in and out. No need to match it to anything but itself. But before we lean toward any single candle, before we drift, say, toward that small unlit flame at the far end, or that fierce blue one burning so hot it seems almost to sing, there is something worth sitting with first, here at the start, while the whole table is still just a wide field of scattered light above you. Because every one of these 7 flames, however different they may look from this hillside, however different their colors or their sizes, or the pace at which they burn, is built from the very same simple idea, the same small quiet agreement between forces that has been holding steady long before your grandparents' grandparents ever lay back on a hillside like this one. Before we can understand what makes a red flame different from a blue one, or why one candle on this table has already gone dark while another has barely begun, we should understand something more basic than all of that. We should understand what a flame is in the first place, what it actually means, out there in that wide dark, for a ball of gas to catch, to hold itself together, to burn steadily for millions or billions of years without ever quite burning away, without collapsing in on itself, without scattering apart into nothing. It is, in its own way, the simplest and oldest kind of balance there is, older than the hillside beneath you, older than the idea of hillsides at all. So let your eyes rest now on the table as a whole, unfocused, patient. And let us lean in closer together, not yet toward any single candle, but toward the flame itself, toward the quiet architecture that lets a star be a star at all. The hidden agreement burning steadily inside every one of the 7 lights waiting for us tonight. A flame, before it is anything else, is a kind of agreement. 2 forces meet inside it, and neither one wins, and that refusal to win is what lets it keep burning instead of collapsing or scattering into the dark. This is true of the small wax flame on any table you have ever sat beside, and it is true, in its own enormous way, of every star hanging over the hillside where you are resting now. A star is mostly hydrogen, the lightest, plainest element there is, the same atom folded into the water you drink and the breath you just took, gathered into a ball so vast that its own weight becomes a kind of hand, pressing inward from every side at once. Left alone, that hand would close. The whole star would fold down into itself, smaller and smaller. The way a held breath eventually wants to leave the chest, the way a tent collapses the moment you pull its center pole away. But it is not left alone. Deep in the core, where the pressure and heat climb high enough, tens of millions of degrees, pressures beyond anything you could picture as weight, hydrogen atoms are pressed so closely together that they fuse into helium, and that fusion breathes outward exactly as much warmth and light as gravity's hand presses inward. Push meets push. Nothing wins. You can hold this in your own chest for a moment if it helps. The way your ribs rise against the weight of the air above them, the way that rising and that weight settle, night after night, into something you no longer have to think about. The star holds its shape for as long as that balance lasts, sometimes for a few million years, sometimes for longer than the universe itself has yet been alive. And this holding has a name astronomers use quietly among themselves: hydrostatic equilibrium. Though you do not need to remember the name, only the feeling underneath it, a flame that has learned to carry its own weight without, flickering out and without spilling over, a shape held not by walls or by will, but by two patient forces leaning against each other forever. Every candle on our table tonight, from the faintest to the fiercest, is doing this same unglamorous, continuous work, second after second, the whole time you have been alive, and long, long before that, before the hillside, before the idea of a hillside, before anything that could have called itself a listener at all. And because each of these flames is burning at its own particular pace, each one wears its temperature openly, right there on the surface, for anyone patient enough to look. You already know this without knowing you know it. Think of the coils of an old stove warming up. First a low, dull red then, if it climbs hotter, a brighter orange, and only at the very hottest a kind of white. Stars are doing the same thing, only on a scale that makes the stove seem like a single grain of sand. A star whose surface sits around 3,000 degrees glows a deep, banked red, low and unhurried, like an ember that has settled into itself for the night and has no plans to go anywhere before morning. Warm that surface further, 5,000 degrees, 6,000, and the light shifts toward yellow, then toward a clean, daylight white. The color our own sun wears when you catch it low on the horizon, softened by the air between you and it. Keep climbing, past 10,000 degrees, past 20, and the light tips over into a blue so sharp it looks almost cold to the eye, though it is in truth the hottest color a flame can wear, heat-dressed, strangely, in the color we usually save for ice and deep water, and the coolest hour just before dawn. This is one of the easiest tricks in the whole night sky to carry home with you. Color as a kind of thermometer, visible from a hillside with nothing more than your own patient eye and the willingness to actually look rather than glance. Red is cool. Blue is fierce. Everything else sits somewhere along that long, unbroken gradient between them, and every star you will ever see is, in this sense, already telling you the truth about itself before you ever think to ask. No secret, no disguise, just heat, translated into color, traveling however many years it takes to finally reach your open eye. Because this pattern holds so reliably, the people who have spent lifetimes cataloging starlight arrange the stars into an order, a kind of ladder running from the hottest, bluest flames down to the coolest, reddest embers. They gave the rungs of that ladder letters that, on their own, mean almost nothing: O, B, A, F, G, K, M. A sequence that looks at first like a password rather than a poem, until you understand what it is actually naming. It is naming the candles on our table, in the order you would meet them if you walked from one end of that table to the other, unhurried, letting each flame introduce itself before you moved on to the next. At the O end sit the rare, blazing blue giants, burning so hot and so briefly that the universe can only ever hold a small handful of them lit at any one time. Bright, generous, gone, almost as soon as they arrive. Moving down through B and A, the flames cool and settle into whites, brilliant even now, generous even now with their light, but no longer quite so wild, no longer burning through themselves at quite such a reckless pace. By the time you reach F and G, you are standing in more familiar territory. G is where our own sun keeps its steady yellow-white flame. One candle among hundreds of billions on this table alone. Remarkable to us mainly because we happen to be standing so close to it, close enough to feel it on our skin. Past G comes K, a deeper, quieter orange, and then M, the long, patient run of red flames that make up the vast, quiet majority of the table, far more numerous than anyone assumes on a first glance upward toward a sky that seems, at first, mostly dark. 7 letters, 7 kinds of light, though tonight, on our own particular table, we will let a few of those letters share a candle, so that the flames we gather to meet, one by one, are exactly 7, each with its own color, its own pace, its own long and unhurried story of how it came to burn the way it does. You do not need to memorize the ladder, or hold the letters in order the way you might have once memorized something for a test. You only need to know that it exists, quietly ordering the sky the way a good host orders a long table, so that nothing you meet tonight will feel arbitrary or strange. Every flame has its place at this table. Every place has its reason, patient and settled, waiting only for you to arrive. So let your eyes drift, now, toward the far end of that ladder, where the light grows faintest and coolest, past even the deep red of the M stars, out to the very edge of what still deserves to be called burning at all. There, at the dim border of the table, sits a kind of candle unlike the rest, one that gathered itself out of the same dust and gravity as every true star, that pulled inward with real weight and real intention, that drew itself in from a wide, slow cloud the way every star does, and that reached, in its own patient way, toward the threshold where fusion begins. And then, almost, it lit. Almost it did not have quite enough mass, quite enough of that inward pressing hand, to strike the full and lasting flame that keeps a star burning for billions of years without faltering. What it found instead was something softer and far stranger, a brief, dim warmth that does not sustain itself, a glow that comes not from the steady marriage of gravity and fusion, but from something closer to a long, slow exhale, fading by fractions of a degree across ages longer than we can easily hold in mind, longer than any candle we would recognize by that name. It sits there now, at the very end of the table, neither quite a star, nor quite not one, too faint for the naked eye, too patient to ever burn out in any ordinary hurry, waiting only for us to lean in close enough to notice it at all, the way you might notice, at the far corner of a long table, a single candle that never quite caught, and yet never stopped glowing either. This is where we go next, easing down the ladder past even the reddest true stars, to the candle that tried to light, and almost did, and has been holding its own strange, faint color ever since. So let your eyes travel to that last rung of the ladder now, past the blues and the whites and the yellows, past the low ambers, down to the place where the light almost gives out entirely. This is where the first candle waits. Not blazing, not even properly caught, somewhere out on that vast dark table, in numbers too great to count from any one hillside. There are objects that gathered themselves out of the same drifting hydrogen as every other star, pulled inward by the same patient gravity, and simply never gathered quite enough. They are heavier than any planet. Some 80 times the mass of Jupiter would be needed to strike the match that makes a true sun, and this candle stopped short of that, somewhere between about 13 Jupiters and 80. Enough weight to feel the squeeze at its core, not enough to sustain the long, self-renewing fire of hydrogen fusion that keeps a star's flame burning for billions upon billions of years. We call these the brown dwarfs, though brown is only a word we borrowed for something the eye was never really built to see. If you could drift close to one, it would not look brown at all. It would glow instead in a hushed, deep magenta, a color mostly hidden below red, spilling its warmth out as infrared light that our eyes pass straight through without ever noticing it is there. A candle that reached toward the table's fire and almost caught it. Almost is not nothing. In that first rush of gathering, when the young core briefly grew hot and dense enough, these objects did manage a small, private kind of burning, not hydrogen, but deuterium, a heavier, rarer cousin of hydrogen that ignites at a lower temperature, and in the largest of them, a trace of lithium too, fusing away in a brief flare that might last only 100 million years or so before that thin fuel runs out. It is a modest fire by any standard the table sets. A true yellow star like the one you know will burn steadily for some 10 billion years. A brown dwarf spends its entire flame in a span so much smaller that, set beside the other candles, it barely registers as burning at all. A single held breath against an evening that lasts an age. And then it simply stops. There is no dramatic ending here, no last gasp, no violence in any of it. The deuterium is spent, the fusion falls silent, and the object begins the long, unhurried work of cooling, dimming by degrees, decade folding into decade, era into era, radiating away the leftover warmth of its own formation into the black between the stars. More slowly than almost anything else in the universe is known to change. Astronomers have watched brown dwarfs cooling for as long as we've had instruments fine enough to find them, tracking their fading light year after year, and every single one we've ever measured is even now only partway through that long descent. None has yet gone fully cold. None may, not for far longer than the universe itself has so far had time to exist. For a long while, this candle was only a suspicion, a shape scientists reasoned must exist somewhere on the table, filling the faint gap between the smallest true stars and the largest planets, calculated on paper decades before anyone actually saw one glowing faintly in the dark to prove it real. That changed in 1995 when astronomers turned their instruments toward a young star cluster called the Pleiades, a loose gathering of stars still young enough to hold on to some of their earliest secrets, and found a faint companion drifting near one of its members. They named it Tidy 1, after the volcano on the island where the observatory that found it stands watch over the Atlantic. Its light, when they finally spread it out into a spectrum and read it the way one reads a long and patient letter, carried the telltale signature of lithium, the fragile element that true stars burn away almost immediately once their cores grow properly hot, but that a cooler, gentler object like this one could still be seen holding on to. It was proof laid out plainly in a thin, dark line of light. Here at last was a candle that had never grown hot enough to consume its own lithium, confirmed not by guesswork, but by the star's own faint testimony. Since that confirmation, we have found thousands more scattered across the dark, some drifting utterly alone between the stars, unbound to any solar system, unaccompanied by any true sun at all, simply floating through the great emptiness of the table on their own private, unlit orbit around the center of the galaxy, far from any warmth but their own. And there is something worth resting in, here, before we drift onward. This candle at the very foot of the ladder never got to blaze. It never lit a planet's sky the way our own familiar star lights ours, never warmed an ocean, never gave anything the long golden decades a true sun gives to whatever might circle it. And yet it belongs at the table all the same, formed the same way, out of the same collapsing cloud, held by the same gravity that shapes every other flame, counted among the same great family of objects that fill the night. There is no shame in this candle's dimness, no failure written into it anywhere, only a different way of existing in the dark. Some flames are asked to blaze across thousands of light years for billions of years. Others are only asked to gather, glow faintly for a little while, in a color we can barely perceive, and then rest for longer yet. Both are real. Both belong at the same table. Perhaps you know, somewhere in your own life, something of that same tender permission that not every light needs to be the brightest one in the room to matter, that simply having gathered yourself together out of the scattered dark and held your shape for a while is already enough to be counted among the stars. No blazing required, no proving necessary, nothing left to prove tonight at all. Picture, if it helps, the difference in scale without any pressure to hold the numbers exactly. Jupiter itself is already an enormous world, wide enough that dozens of our own planet could line up across its face. And still it falls short, by a wide margin, of the mass a brown dwarf needs simply to begin. Stack 13 worlds the size of Jupiter together, fold them into one body, and only then does deuterium begin to stir at the core. Stack 80 together, and hydrogen itself would finally catch, crossing over into true starlight. Somewhere in that wide, patient range between 13 and 80 sits every brown dwarf that has ever formed, heavier than any world we could call a planet, lighter than any flame we would call a star, belonging fully to neither category, and yet excluded from none of the table's warmth. Think for a moment of what it would actually mean to find such a candle. It gives off almost nothing in the light your eyes were built for. No proud white glow, no honest yellow warmth, nothing a hillside telescope of old could ever have caught. It had to wait for instruments built to feel heat rather than see light, orbiting observatories tuned to infrared, patient enough to notice a faint magenta smudge against the black, where nothing seemed to be. Only then could we begin counting them properly, mapping how many of these unlit candles drift near us, some closer than the nearest bright star you could name, hidden in plain sight simply because they never learned to shine the way our eyes expect a star to shine. And the more we counted, the more it became clear that this quiet, cooling category is not some rare exception on the table. It may be nearly as common as the true stars themselves, an entire hidden population going about its slow business in the dark, asking nothing of the universe but time. Now let your attention drift just one rung higher, to the very next candle along the table, because something remarkable happens there, right at that edge. Cross a certain threshold of mass, cross roughly 80 times the weight of Jupiter, and everything changes at once. The core grows just hot enough, just dense enough for hydrogen itself to catch, not briefly, not as a passing flare that burns out within 100 million years, but as the long, steady, self-sustaining fire that makes a true star, a fire that will keep that candle lit for longer than almost anything else the table holds. This is the exact threshold the brown dwarfs never quite reached, the narrow margin between an object that gathers and cools, and one that gathers and truly ignites. And on the other side of that line, dim and red and remarkably patient, wait candles that did catch, that lit, however faintly, however modestly compared to their grander neighbors further up the ladder, and have gone on quietly burning ever since, in numbers greater than almost anything else scattered across the whole vast table tonight. Right beside that unlit candle, so close on the table that in poor light you might mistake one for the other, sits a flame that did catch. Barely, but enough. This is the threshold where true fire begins, the last rung before nothing, and it is here that we turn now, away from the dull magenta glow of the brown dwarfs and toward the small red stars that actually burn. Feel the difference as a kind of held breath finally released, where the brown dwarfs simmered and gave up. These smaller cousins found just enough hydrogen, just enough inward pull to light and keep lighting. You can let your shoulders drop a little as we arrive here, because this next candle, humble as it looks, turns out to be the most common flame at the entire table. Picture the table stretching away from you in every direction, crowded with points of color, and understand that if you could tally every single one, 3 out of every 4 would burn this same low red. Red dwarfs are the quiet majority of the galaxy, not the rare showpieces, not the flames that draw the eye first, but the ordinary, abundant backbone of the night sky, so faint individually that not one is visible to the naked eye from Earth, despite there being tens of billions of them scattered through the Milky Way alone. The nearest star to our own sun, a small companion named Proxima Centauri, is exactly this kind of candle, a red dwarf sitting a mere 4.2 light-years away, so dim that it went undiscovered until 1915, hiding in plain sight because its light is a whisper compared to its brighter neighbors. Let that sit with you for a moment. The closest fire to our own has been burning beside us the whole time, and it took patient watching just to notice it was there at all. Consider, too, how strange it is that something so close could stay hidden for so long. Proxima Centauri sits scarcely a quarter of a light-year nearer to us than the 2 brighter stars it travels alongside, Alpha Centauri, A and B. And yet those 2, larger, hotter, more generous with their light, were charted centuries earlier, while their small red companion waited unnoticed in the same patch of sky. There is something worth carrying with you in that nearness alone does not guarantee that a thing will be seen. Sometimes the quietest flame at the table is also the one standing right beside you, and it simply takes the right kind of attention, held long enough, for its color to finally register. What makes a red dwarf burn the way it does has to do with its size, and here the flame metaphor holds beautifully if you let it. Picture a candle so small and so frugal that it never wastes a single drop of wax. Nothing pools unused at the base. Nothing goes dark while the wick yet has fuel to reach. That is what physicists call full convection, and it is one of the true wonders tucked inside these unassuming little stars. In a star like our sun, only the churning outer layers stir and mix, while the deep core keeps its own hydrogen mostly to itself, fusing what is nearby and leaving outer fuel untouched for a very long time. A red dwarf has no such divided household. Its entire body, from center to surface, circulates in one continuous, unhurried current, carrying fresh hydrogen down into the fusing core and carrying spent material back out again, over and over, endlessly turning its whole self over like water folding through itself in a low simmer. Nothing is set aside. Nothing is wasted. Every part of the star eventually takes its turn near the flame. There is a kind of fairness in that arrangement, if you want to see it that way. no hidden reservoir left behind, no portion of the star excused from the work of burning. What begins at the outer edge, far from any heat, will in time be folded inward and given its turn near the core, and what has already been spent near the center will rise back out to cool and circle again before its next pass. A red dwarf does not hoard. It simply keeps turning its whole self toward the flame, one slow rotation at a time, and that thoroughness is exactly what buys it so much unhurried time. This is precisely why a red dwarf can promise something almost impossible to hold in the mind, a lifespan measured not in billions of years, as with our own sun, but in trillions. A red dwarf sips its hydrogen so sparingly and stirs it so completely that the smallest of these stars, the ones just a tenth the mass of our sun, are expected to keep glowing for something on the order of 10 trillion years or more. Consider that the universe itself, as best as watchers have measured it, is only about 13.8 billion years old. A single red dwarf, tending its low red flame this very moment, will likely remain lit when that number has been multiplied many hundreds of times over. Nothing else at this table, nothing we will meet tonight, comes close to that patience. Not one of these stars has yet had the chance to grow old, because the universe itself has not yet lived long enough. Every red dwarf you could ever point toward is, in truth, a young flame, however ancient it might feel to imagine it, an infant candle, by cosmic reckoning, that has scarcely begun the first sliver of the long life waiting ahead of it. And these small steady candles are rarely alone on their little patch of the table. Around a great many red dwarfs, worlds have been found circling close, rocky planets pulled into tight, warm orbits by a star with a modest, undemanding gentle pull. Because a red dwarf gives off comparatively little heat and light, any planet wanting to feel real warmth on its surface has to sit nearer than Mercury sits to our sun, tucked close against the flame the way you might draw a blanket a little closer on a cold night. Some of the most talked about small worlds ever found, rocky planets discovered orbiting stars with names like Proxima and TRAPPIST-1, circle exactly this kind of star. The TRAPPIST-1 system alone holds 7 such worlds, huddled so near their small red sun that, standing on one of them, you might look up and see the others hanging close overhead, each one large and near enough to show its own faint continents in clouds, the way a friend's face fills a window when they lean in close to say goodnight. It is a strange and lovely thought to hold as you drift here. Across the galaxy, uncountable small planets may be turning right now in the low red hush of exactly this candlelight, their whole sky tinted the color of embers, their days and nights measured out by a flame that will very likely outlast every other kind of star we will meet tonight. There is even a planet found circling Proxima Centauri itself, a rocky world roughly the size of our own, orbiting so near its dim red sun that a full year there passes in a little over 11 days. Stand there, in imagination only, and the sky would carry none of the harsh brilliance you might expect from a star. Only a deep, steady red-orange glow, larger in the sky than our own sun appears from Earth, yet gentler, dimmer, easier on the eyes, the kind of light you could watch rise without ever needing to look away. Whatever else circles that particular candle, it circles beneath a flame built for the long haul, one that will still be burning, unbothered, long after every clock we know how to build has stopped mattering. Let yourself rest in that image a little longer, a night sky somewhere else entirely, painted red, patient, and impossibly enduring. Then let your attention drift back to our own corner of the table, back to the particular candle whose light already knows the shape of your skin, whether you have ever thought of it that way or not. It is not the smallest flame here. It is not, by any means, the grandest. It sits somewhere comfortably in the middle of everything, burning a warm and familiar yellow, and something about it feels less like discovery and more like recognition, as though you have always known exactly where on this vast table to find it. This is the flame that wakes you in the morning, that warms the side of a hillside just like this one, that has never once in all of human memory gone dark. Every generation that has ever lived beneath open sky has looked up and found this same candle in its expected place, has felt its particular warmth on upturned faces without once needing to ask its name first. A familiarity so complete that it hardly registers as a star at all, more a fact of being alive than an object out among the others. And yet it is exactly that. One more candle on this same vast table, burning its own steady color among the red dwarfs and the unlit brown ones, no more and no less remarkable than any flame we have visited so far, except that this one, of every candle here, happens to be the one that already knows the shape of your skin. Let your eyes settle there now, on that one particular light among so many, because it is time to meet it properly, up close, as the flame it has always been to you. And that fourth candle, the one you have been resting your attention on, is neither the smallest flame at the table nor the grandest. It is not trying to outlast every other light in the room, and it is not swelling towards some far horizon. It simply burns, warm and yellow, at a pace that feels, strangely, immediately, familiar. You do not need anyone to tell you its name before something in you recognizes it. This is the flame you already know. This is our own sun. Astronomers file it, plainly, as a G-type main sequence star, a yellow dwarf, one rung up the ladder from the red flames you just left behind, and one rung down from flames so fierce we have not met them yet tonight. Middle of the table. Middle of the ladder. A star content to occupy the exact center of the ordinary, which is, itself, a kind of quiet miracle, because there is nothing average about what it took to get here. Picture a sphere of hydrogen and helium, roughly 1,300,000 times the volume of the small stone you might be standing on right now, and at its heart, a furnace holding a temperature near 15 million degrees, pressing outward against its own staggering weight with exactly enough force to keep from either collapsing or drifting apart. That is the balance you learned about earlier, the one holding every candle upright on the table, and here it is again, closer than any of the others will ever be, doing its patient work 8 light minutes from where you are lying. The sun is, by the measure of stars, neither young nor old. It has been burning for about 4.5 billion years, and current understanding gives it something like 10 billion years of this steady main sequence life before its character will begin to change. Which means it rests, tonight, somewhere close to the midpoint of its own long life, an easy, unhurried point in an arc that stretches almost unfathomably in both directions. Long before there were hillsides, or listeners, or nights like this one, it was already a light. Long after, it will still be shining, changed but recognizable, onto a world that may look nothing like the one you know. For now, though, this particular evening, this particular breath, it is simply doing what it has always done, faithfully at its own pace, without needing to hurry toward any of that future. What that faithfulness looks like, up close, is almost too large to hold in the mind gently, so let it arrive softly, the way starlight does. Deep in the solar core, something like 600 million tons of hydrogen are converted into helium every single second. Not once, not as some rare event to be marked and remembered every second, endlessly, for 4.5 billion years already, and for billions more to come. A small fraction of that mass does not become helium at all. It becomes light and warmth instead, radiating outward as the energy that eventually reaches your skin. You have felt this. Not metaphorically. Actually, the heat on your face on a bright afternoon. The way sunlight through a window can make a whole room feel held, that sensation traces back, in an unbroken chain, to fusion happening in a core 93 million miles away. Of all 7 candles on this table, this is the only one whose warmth has ever technically touched you. But here is the part that turns awe into something almost tender. That light you have felt is old by the time it reaches you. Not old in the way of ancient things gathering dust, but old in the way of a letter that took a very long time to be delivered. A photon born in the sun's core does not simply escape. It is swallowed almost immediately by the dense, crowded plasma around it, absorbed. Released, absorbed again, deflected in some new direction each time, and it goes on like this hushed, patient shuffling, for what current estimates place at somewhere between 10,000 and 170,000 years, drifting a little farther from the center with each small step, in what physicists call a random walk, though there is nothing anxious in it, only the unhurried geometry of light finding its way home. Only once it finally reaches the surface does it slip free, and from there the final stretch, the 93 million miles of open space between the sun's face and your own, takes just over 8 minutes. 8 minutes for the last leg of a journey that may have begun before there were oceans as we know them, before your ancestors' ancestors, before almost anything you could name. Every ray of sunlight you have ever felt on your arms is a message decades upon decades in the making, finally arriving, finally landing softly, precisely, on you. Around this steady core, layer after layer carries that fusion light outward in its own particular way. First through the dense, radiative middle of the star, where the long shuffling journey happens, and then, nearer the surface, through a churning outer layer where hot plasma physically rises and cools and sinks again, not unlike water coming to a slow boil, carrying the last of that ancient light the rest of the way up. You can almost picture it, heat folding over itself, rising, releasing, sinking back down, over and over. An unhurried breathing you would never guess was happening from where you once lay on the hillside, feeling only warmth, only light, only the plain gift of it landing on you. There is something in that thought worth simply resting in for a moment. The sun is not a stranger among the 7 candles. The dim ones you met earlier burn quietly out at distances measured in years of light, indifferent, ancient, unaware. But this one, this yellow flame, this ordinary, dependable, middle-aged star, has been in a kind of quiet correspondence with you your whole life, sending its slow letters of warmth across the dark, one photon at a time, long before you were born to receive them, and long after tonight, you will keep receiving them still. It does not know your name. It does not need to. It simply keeps sending the light, the way it has for 4.5 billion years, the way it will for billions more, patient beyond any patience we usually imagine, faithful beyond any promise we usually make. And so this candle, of all 7, does not feel distant the way the others might. You do not have to imagine its light, you carry the memory of it in your skin, in the color it has given to every sunrise you have ever slept through or watched, in the particular gold it lays across water in the last hour before evening. It is the candle that made the hillside beneath you warm enough, at some point today, to hold your weight comfortably. It is the candle whose rhythm your own body has learned without ever being taught, waking with its rising, softening with its setting, some quiet clock inside you tuned, across all your life, to this one particular flame among the seven. Let yourself hold that recognition a little longer before we move on, because from here, the table asks something different of you. You have now met the candle nearest to home, the one already familiar, and there is a temptation to stay here, resting in what is known. But there are still 3 flames waiting farther along the table, flames unlike anything you have felt against your skin, and to reach them, you will have to let go of the hillside itself. So let the ground beneath you loosen its hold, just slightly, not falling, nothing like falling, only lifting. The way a leaf might rise on a current of warm air it did not ask for and does not need to understand. The hillside, the grass, the particular weight of your own body pressed into the earth, let all of that soften and recede beneath you, smaller with each passing moment, not lost. Simply set down gently for now, the way you might set down something precious before reaching for something else. You are not leaving anything behind. You are only changing your vantage, the way your eyes might drift shut without you deciding to close them. Above you and around you, and somehow now beneath you too, the table stretches on, dark and vast and scattered with its 7 kinds of flame, and the yellow one you have just come to know so intimately begins to shrink behind you, not vanishing, only settling into its place among the others, one warm point among many, still sending its slow letters onward into a dark that no longer has your name, written quite so clearly on it. Ahead, somewhere far off across that dark tablecloth, other lights are waiting, colder ones and far, far hotter ones, and the whole of that vast surface begins, gently, to unfold before you, wide enough that even a rising, drifting view can only take in a little of it at a time. You do not need to hold on to anything for what comes next. Whatever is carrying you now is patient with you, the same slow, steady patience the sun itself has always kept. There is nowhere to be, nothing to do but let yourself be lifted, inch by unhurried inch, up and away from the last warm place you have ever truly touched. Up, into the wide, quiet crossing that waits between one candle and the next. And because that particular flame already knows you, because its warmth has touched your shoulders on 1,000 ordinary afternoons without you ever once thinking of it as a candle on a vast table, something in you is finally ready to leave the hillside. Not to climb it, not to walk it, but to rise from it, the way a held breath rises when at last you let it go. You do not have to do anything. The same gravity that keeps every flame on the table burning in its own shape, holding the ball of it together against its own fierce heat, is the same gravity that will carry you now, gently cradling you the way it cradles a world in orbit, the way it cradles a moon, the way it has always cradled you against the floor beneath your bed without you needing to ask it to. So let it. Let your body stay where it is, heavy and warm and unbothered, while some quieter part of you lifts, weightless, off the hillside, off the grass, off the whole idea of ground. Below you now the table is not a hillside anymore. It is distance itself, laid out flat and dark and endless, candle after candle after candle scattered across it, in a pattern too large for any one glance to hold. You are drifting above it the way a leaf drifts above a lake it will never quite touch, carried, not falling, held aloft by the same unseen hand that holds every flame in its place. There is no wind up here. There is no sound at all, not the sound of your own breathing, not the sound of anything. Only the long, unhurried passage of light beneath you, sliding past like water so slow it seems almost solid, like a river remembering how to be a river. You pass the first candle before you even notice you have passed it. That is how far apart these flames really are. If the whole of your understanding could shrink the sun down to something the size of an orange resting in your open palm, the next nearest candle on the table, the one called Proxima, would not be sitting beside it on the same table at all. It would be another orange, small and dim, set down more than 2,000 miles away, past horizons you could not see even if you turned your head. That is the true shape of this table. Candles lit impossibly far apart, each one alone in its own pool of dark, each one patient about it. In the ordinary measure of your daylight world, Proxima sits 4 and a bit years of light from where you slept last night. Light itself, the fastest thing that exists, taking more than 4 years just to cross that single gap. And still, on a table this size, 4 light years is nothing. It is the width of a single breath. It is the space between 2 candles that happen, by pure chance, to be close enough to call each other neighbors. This is the part of the crossing worth resting in for a moment. How much of what you are passing through is simply room? Not danger, not chaos, not the crowded rushing sky that old fears might have painted for you. Just room, vast and unclaimed and quiet. Candlelight scattered so thin across it that if you reached out both arms as you drift, you could pass whole lifetimes without your fingers brushing anything at all. The space between the flames is not empty in the frightened sense of the word. It is empty the way a held silence is empty, the way the middle of a long night is empty, full of exactly the stillness it needs to be. Dust drifts through it, so fine it would take centuries to fill a room with it. A wisp of gas curls, unhurried, going nowhere in particular. And that is nearly all. The candles do not crowd their table. They are spread across it the way an entire ocean might hold only a scatter of unhurried lights along its far shore, each one keeping its own small distance out of something that looks, from up here, almost like courtesy. If you could somehow set the whole table down small enough to fit inside a single room in your own house, the true size of it would surprise you more than its darkness ever could. Shrink every gap you have ever imagined between stars down to something walkable, and the candles themselves would still be smaller than dust motes catching afternoon light, while the floor between them stretched on and on, room after unlit room, a house built almost entirely of hallway. You are drifting now through that hallway, past door after door, that opens onto nothing but more hallway, and there is a kind of ease in realizing that this enormous, patient in between, is in fact the ordinary condition of the table, not an exception to it. The candles are the rare thing. The room around them is the rule. Somewhere far behind you, tucked into one modest fold of that vast house, your own particular hallway holds its own particular candle, and it does not mind, even for a moment, being left dim and unwatched while you drift on past it towards something else. And every flame you pass is showing you something that has already finished happening. This is the strange, tender secret of drifting above a lit table in the dark. None of what you see is now. The glow reaching your eyes from that candle on your left set out from its flame years ago, decades ago, in some cases so long ago that the hand which might have first noticed it had not yet been born to notice it. You are not watching these candles burn. You are watching messages they sent long before tonight, arriving only now, patient couriers that never once hurried across all that room between the flames. Some of the light sliding past you beneath your drifting body left its candle before your own life began, kept the whole shape of that flame's warmth intact through years of crossing nothing but quiet, and is only now, in this unhurried moment, finding you. You could almost call it a kind of memory made visible, the past still glowing, still finding its way to whoever happens to be there to receive it. So you drift, and beneath you the table keeps unfolding. Dim red candles giving way to dimmer ones, small steady flames scattered thick as the true crowd of the table, though each one still politely apart from its neighbors. The whole scene lit so faintly in places that it seems less like a table and more like a memory of one. Now and then, a single flame passes almost directly beneath you, close enough that you notice the faint flicker in its color. A candle with some small companion of its own tucked nearby. A pair keeping each other's distance, and yet somehow, across all that room, still finding each other. You are not required to understand any of it as you pass. You are only required to keep drifting, the way you would let a slow current carry you past the lit windows of houses you will never enter, curious without needing to knock. Time loses its usual grip on you up here. You could not say whether you have been drifting for a minute or for as long as some of this starlight has been traveling to reach you. Both feel equally true, equally weightless, equally fine to leave unanswered. There is nothing to steer, nothing to decide, nothing waiting for you to arrive anywhere in particular. You are simply being carried, the way you were always meant to be carried through a night like this one, past candle after candle, each of them minding its own small fire, none of them asking anything of you at all. Even the passing itself has stopped feeling like movement. It feels more like the table turning slowly beneath a body that has finally stopped needing to hold itself up. And then, far off along the table, past the last of the small red flames, something changes in the color of the dark. It begins so faintly you might mistake it for your own eyes adjusting. A hint of white where there had only been black, then a hint of blue threaded through the white, cool and clean and startlingly bright, the way a single held note can cut through a very quiet room. It is not close. It is not urgent. It simply grows, the way dawn grows before you have decided to notice it, that blue deepening and widening the further you drift, until it is unmistakably a flame of its own, fiercer than anything you have passed tonight, burning with a light so sharp and pale it seems almost cold to look at, though you know, somewhere underneath the calm of this drifting, that nothing at that end of the table could truly be called cold. The current beneath you seems to bend gently toward it now, the way a slow river bends toward the sea without ever seeming to hurry, carrying you closer, candle by unseen candle, toward whatever kind of flame could burn that blue. And now the glow you have been drifting toward stops being a rumor of light and becomes a flame in its own right, close enough that its color finally declares itself. It is blue. Not the cold blue of ice, not the pale blue of a winter sky, but a hot, saturated, electric blue. The blue of something burning as fast as matter knows how to burn. You have arrived, without any effort of your own, at the tall end of the table, where the candles stand highest and their light reaches the farthest across the dark cloth of space. This is the home of the O-type and B-type stars, the flame the latter was always leading toward, and one of its most famous residents, Rigel, marking the foot of a familiar winter hunter in the sky, waits here for you now, patient, blazing, entirely unaware of how far its light has had to travel just to reach your eyes on that hillside. Feel, for a moment, what tens of thousands of degrees actually means, not as a number to remember, but as a sensation to borrow. If the sun's yellow warmth is like sunlight resting on your shoulders on an ordinary afternoon, then this blue light is something else entirely. A furnace so far beyond ordinary heat that the very color of its glow shifts away from red and orange and yellow, skipping past white, settling instead on a searing, saturated blue, the shortest, most energetic wavelength a flame can wear. A star like Rigel can burn at somewhere around 12,000 degrees at its surface, and the true giants of this class climb even higher, past 20, past 30,000 degrees, hot enough that if you have been holding in your body since the last movement the memory of red dwarf embers glowing low and patient, you can let that memory go now, and let this new sensation take its place. Not a warmth you could rest inside, but a brilliance you are only ever meant to witness from a great and merciful distance, the way you are witnessing it now, floating safely above the table rather than beside the flame itself. And this is where the 7-candle metaphor earns its clearest meaning of the whole night, because a blue giant does not merely look brighter than its neighbors down the table. It burns brighter by a staggering margin. A star like this can outshine the sun by tens of thousands of times, pouring out in a single hour more light than our own quiet yellow flame gives off in a year. And yet, if you let your attention rest on that thought for even a breath, a second truth arrives close behind it, gentle but unavoidable. This is precisely why blue giants do not last. A candle burning tall and bright is spending its wax at a furious pace, and stars are no different. Where a red dwarf can sip its hydrogen so slowly that trillions of years unspool before it even notices its fuel thinning, a blue giant runs through its hydrogen in what is, on the scale of a star's life, hardly any time at all, a few million years, sometimes less. A flicker set against the red dwarf's trillions, a single held breath against an entire lifetime of unhurried sleep. The tallest candles on the table are, without exception, the ones that will gutter out soonest. There is no unfairness in this, only a kind of physics that mirrors something almost tender, intensity and brevity, walking hand in hand. But do not let brevity sound like tragedy, because inside that short, ferocious burning, something extraordinary is quietly taking place, layer by layer, deep in the star's core, and it is worth resting here for a while, because this is where the thread of tonight's story truly begins to gather itself. In the heart of a blue giant, gravity presses down with a strength no smaller star will ever know, and the temperatures at the core climb high enough to fuse not just hydrogen into helium, the way our sun does, but to keep going, helium into carbon, carbon into oxygen, and in the very largest of these stars, layer after layer forming inward like the rings of a tree grown impossibly fast, all the way to iron. Think of it as a candle whose flame, instead of staying one simple color, begins quietly forging inside itself the raw material for candles not yet made, carbon, the element woven into every living thing that has ever breathed, oxygen, carried now in your own next slow inhale, iron, resting even now in the calm, steady blood moving unhurried through your body. Nothing about this needs to feel weighty or strange. It is simply true, and it is simply beautiful, that the atoms letting you exist tonight were assembled inside a furnace like this one, long before this hillside, long before this table, long before you. And when a blue giant's fuel is finally truly spent, when the layers of fusion can no longer hold their fierce balance against the pull of the star's own gravity, The ending is not violent in the way that word might suggest to a worried mind. It is, instead, a kind of release. The outer layers, having spent millions of years being forged and reforged, are given back to the space around them in an enormous brief flash of light and material astronomers call a supernova. And in that giving back, all those hard-won elements, the carbon, the oxygen, the iron, are scattered outward across the table, drifting through the space between the other candles, settling eventually into clouds of gas and dust that will one day gather themselves into new stars, new planets, perhaps new quiet hillsides somewhere else entirely, with their own listeners lying beneath their own night sky. You are allowed to feel this not as an ending, but as a kind of patient generosity, a flame that burned fast precisely so that its light and its substance could be passed onward, seating tables not yet set. The iron carried gently in your blood tonight, the very thing letting your heart continue its slow, unhurried work while you drift toward sleep, once belonged to a furnace exactly like this one, spent long before the earth itself had formed. There is no need to rush past the strangeness of a few million years, either, because it deserves a moment of its own. Set beside the red dwarf's trillions, a few million years sounds almost like nothing, and in a way it is, a flicker, a held breath, a single long exhale against an entire sleeping lifetime. And yet a few million years is also an unimaginable stretch by any human measure, more time than every sunrise any person has ever watched, laid end to end, many times over. Both things are true at once, and there is no contradiction in holding them together. A blue giant's life is astonishingly brief for a star, and astonishingly long for anything you might measure against your own quiet evening. You do not need to reconcile these two scales tonight. You only need to let them rest side by side, the way the candles themselves rest side by side on the same table, each keeping its own private sense of time. It may help, too, to picture what a blue giant's fierce, hurried burning is doing far beneath its glowing surface, layer by patient layer, the way a very slow turning wheel might be doing careful work even while the machine around it seems to race. Deep inside, hydrogen becomes helium first, just as it does in every star. But here the pressure and heat never stop climbing. And so the helium itself is pressed onward into carbon, and the carbon into oxygen, and further inward still, toward neon, toward silicon, toward iron. Each new layer settling beneath the last like sediment gathering at the bottom of a very still lake. Except that this gathering happens not over centuries, but within the star's brief handful of million years. You do not need to hold every element's name in memory. What matters is only the shape of the pattern, a flame building itself outward in rings, each ring a slightly heavier kind of matter, quietly assembling, deep in the dark, the very ingredients that rock and ocean and breath and bone will one day be made from. Not every flame at this bright end of the table finishes its life in quite so sudden a flash, though. Some, especially those a little less towering than the very largest, spend their final stretch of life doing something slower and stranger. Something you can watch unfold now, if you let your gaze rest on the flame a little longer. As the hottest core fuel begins to run thin, the star does not do what you might expect of an ordinary candle running low. It does not shrink, does not shrivel inward toward a smaller point of light. Instead, almost impossibly, it swells. The outer layers begin to expand outward, ballooning wider and wider even as the surface itself begins to cool, and as it cools, its color begins to shift, sliding backward down that same ladder you learned about earlier in the night, away from blue, past white, drifting slowly toward orange, and finally toward a deep, glowing red. The tall, fierce blue candle, given enough time, becomes something entirely different to look at. Vast instead of intense, red instead of blue. Its light no longer sharp and electric, but wide and deep and strangely calm, spreading itself outward across more space than any smaller star could ever occupy. And it is toward that swollen, reddening giant, that great, slow transformation waiting further down the table, that your drifting gaze is gently, unhurriedly carried now. And so the fierce blue flame does not simply burn out. It changes shape. This is what happens when a great fire begins to run low on the fuel that once held it so tightly together, it does not shrink to nothing, the way a candle on a windowsill might sputter and vanish. It swells. It reddens. It grows outward into something so much larger than the star that made it that the old shape is barely recognizable, and this is where our table asks us to look again, toward one more candle burning at its far edge, wide and dim and glowing the color of embers left after midnight. Picture Betelgeuse, that deep red point marking the shoulder of a familiar winter constellation. It began its life as a hot blue-white star burning through its hydrogen with the same hurried brilliance we just watched together. But hurried brilliance has a cost, and now, having spent most of that fuel, Betelgeuse has ballooned into something almost impossible to hold in the mind. If you could lift it from the sky and set it down on our table in place of the sun, its outer edge would reach past Mercury, past Venus, past the Earth itself, past Mars, swallowing the inner solar system whole, not out of hunger. Only out of size, a single candle, larger than the whole orbit of everything we call home. And yet, and this is the strange, tender contradiction of a red giant, its surface has grown cooler even as it has grown vast. The blue giants blazed white-hot and small. This kind of star glows a low, ember red, thousands of degrees cooler than our own sun's yellow warmth. Less heat per patch of surface, and yet so much surface, spread across a sphere hundreds of times wider, that the whole of it pours out more light than almost anything else at the table. Not fierce, not sharp. Luminous in the way a bed of coals is luminous, vast, steady, glowing outward in every direction, lighting up the dark around it without needing to hurry. This is not a fate reserved for distant, unfamiliar stars. Our own sun, that yellow flame we sat beside earlier tonight, the one whose warmth you have felt directly on your own skin, will one day follow this same path. Billions of years from now, long after tonight, long after every hillside and every hand that has ever rested on grass, the sun will begin to swell. It will redden. It will grow outward, gently consuming the small rocky worlds nearest to it, expanding until its edge reaches close to where the earth now quietly turns. This is simply what a flame like ours becomes, given enough time, not a punishment, not an ending arriving in violence, only a long, slow unfolding into something larger and softer than what came before. Some stars grow larger still, where a star like our sun becomes what astronomers simply call a red giant. The very largest stars, those blue giants we just left behind before their fuel ran low, become something even more immense, red supergiants. Betelgeuse itself is one of these, hundreds of times the width of the sun, hundreds of thousands of times its brightness, a single point of light bright enough to be seen without any instrument at all from a hillside like the one where we began tonight. Antares wears the same deep red glow in a different corner of the sky. These are the largest true stars known to burn, not the densest, not the hottest, but simply, almost unbelievably, the largest. Let that size settle in you for a moment, without any hurry to move past it. A single flame on our table wide enough to swallow the paths that worlds travel. A single point of light, from here no larger than a grain of salt held at arm's length, actually vast enough that our whole nearby neighborhood of planets would vanish inside it. It is the kind of fact that could feel frightening if you let your mind reach for fear the way it sometimes does with large, unfamiliar things. But notice, instead, what happens when you turn the thought a different way. Consider, too, what such a star is doing with all of that size. Deep in its center, in that final long chapter of its life, a red giant is no longer burning only hydrogen the way it once did. Having used up most of what filled it in youth, it has turned to fusing helium instead, and in the very largest of these stars, that process does not stop there. Element folding into element, shell wrapped around shell, carbon forming, and oxygen, and further along still. Elements heavier than any that existed when the star first caught light. It is, in its own unhurried way, a kind of quiet forge, working for centuries, for millennia, to build the raw materials that will one day become the dust of new worlds and eventually the calcium in a bone or the iron carried in blood. You are made, in some real sense, of the leftover breath of stars, very much like the one glowing red at the edge of our table tonight. Because here is the quiet gift hidden inside all of that scale. We are not that. We are small. Our whole world, every hillside, every table, every candle we have lit in our own small lives would fit inside the shadow of a single one of these swollen flames without leaving so much as a mark. And smallness, held against a table this vast, does not feel like loss. Held rightly, it feels like relief. Think of how much a large thing is asked to carry. The giant candle at the far edge of the table holds within itself entire generations of nuclear furnaces, layer stacked on layer, forging heavier and heavier elements in its final stretch of life, bearing the whole weight of what it must become. It has work still to do before it is finished. But you, small, warm, breathing slowly under a dark sky, you are not asked to carry anything like that tonight. You are not the flame doing the burning. You are only the one watching, safe on the hillside, held by the same soft pull of gravity that keeps every star in its shape, but asked to do nothing at all with that pull except rest inside it. There is something almost tender in realizing that being small is not the same as being unimportant. A single grain of sand on a wide beach does not need to hold up the tide. A single leaf on a great tree does not need to grow the whole forest. And you, here, now, do not need to hold up the weight of anything beyond this one quiet moment. Not the size of the universe, not the fate of a distant red flame, not tomorrow, not anything at all. Tonight, smallness is simply permission. Permission to let your shoulders drop a little further into whatever is holding you. Permission to let the mind, which so often tries to carry everything at once, set its whole load down at the edge of the table and leave it there until morning. Think, too, of how differently a giant star and a small, sleeping body carry their weight. The giant holds up its own outer layers against the pull trying to draw it inward, an unbroken effort spanning millions of years, never once permitted to pause. You are not being asked to hold anything up tonight. The mattress beneath you is already doing that work, the way the floor of a hillside holds the whole weight of a body without complaint, the way a pillow holds the small weight of a head without needing to be thanked for it. Every part of you that has been bracing, gripping, holding itself together through the hours of the day, is allowed, right now, to stop bracing. There is no table here waiting for you to hold it up. There is only a bed, a breath, and a body finally permitted to be as unguarded and unburdened as it likes. So let the giant star be vast. Let it burn a slow, cooling red, larger than worlds, older in its final chapter than anything nearby. It does this work so that you do not have to. Somewhere out at the edge of the table, that enormous ember continues turning fuel into light, layer after layer, patiently building toward whatever it will become next. And here, close and near and entirely unhurried, you get simply to watch it glow. Distant and safe. A color like the last coals of a fire someone else is tending. Because even a flame this large does not burn forever in this shape. There comes a point where the outer layers of a giant star begin to loosen, drifting away from the core, the way breath drifts away from a body on a cold night, visible for a moment, spreading outward, thinning, dissolving into the dark around it. Slowly, gently, without any violence in the motion, the great swollen candle lets go of everything it no longer needs. Layer after layer eases outward into space, forming soft, expanding shells of glowing gas that drift for thousands of years before fading from sight entirely. And underneath all of that outward drifting breath, something else is left behind. Something small. Something impossibly dense, no longer red, no longer swollen, but pale and quiet and still. A tiny ember cooling at the center of where a giant flame used to be. All that vastness folded down now into something you could nearly imagine cupping in your two open hands. It does not roar. It does not reach outward the way its former self did. It simply glows, low and white, patient, waiting at the edge of our table for us to come close enough to see it properly. What is left? When a giant candle finishes breathing out its last soft clouds of color, is smaller than you might expect, smaller even than the flame that first held it. Picture it now. The outer layers of that vast red light have drifted away into the dark, spreading outward like breath on a cold window, and at the center, all that remains is a core about the size of our own Earth, though it once belonged to a star many times wider than the sun that warms your afternoons. This is a white dwarf. This is an ember. There is a star like this, close enough to feel almost like family. Sirius B, the small, dim companion that circles the bright diamond point we call Sirius A, the brightest star in our night sky. For a long while, astronomers only knew Sirius A was wobbling ever so faintly on its path, tugged by something they could not see, some hidden weight nearby. It took patient watching, decade after decade of tracing that small unsteadiness in an otherwise steady point of light, before anyone actually caught sight of the faint companion causing it, a dim white spark hiding in the glare of its brighter neighbor. Where Sirius A blazes, young and vigorous, Sirius B glows faint and white, a spent candle sitting near a strong one, content to rest at the same corner of the table. It is the leftover heart of a star that, long ago, lived a life much like our sun's. Hydrogen into helium, helium into carbon and oxygen, until its fuel ran thin and its outer self drifted off into space, leaving only this dense, cooling core behind, quietly orbited now by the very brightness it once resembled. And dense is almost too small a word for what a white dwarf is. Imagine gathering a single teaspoon of its material. You would need to lift something with the weight of a small car, sometimes more. All of the star's mass, once spread across a sphere many times the width of our entire planet, has folded down into a ball no larger than Earth, and yet it does not collapse further, does not simply crush itself into nothing. It is held, this is the important word, by something called electron degeneracy pressure, a rule written into the deepest grammar of matter, which says that the tiny particles inside the ember refuse to be pressed any closer together. They resist, shoulder to shoulder, in a kind of patient, wordless solidarity, and that resistance is enough. It is enough to hold the whole ember in its shape, forever, without needing any fire at all. Because there is no fire left, a white dwarf does not burn. What glows there is simply leftover warmth, heat stored up over a stellar lifetime, now radiating slowly out into the dark. The way a stone holds the day's sun long after evening has come. There is no fusion left inside it, no inward-outward balance to maintain, no candle flame trembling to hold its shape against gravity. Gravity has already done its work and been answered. What remains is simply cooling, an unhurried release of light that will continue for billions of years, the ember dimming by degrees so small that no human lifetime, no human civilization could ever watch it happen. Astronomers give a name to what such an ember might eventually become, if given enough time, a black dwarf, a cold, dark cinder giving off no visible light at all. But, and this is worth resting on for a moment, no black dwarf has ever been observed, anywhere, because the universe itself is not yet old enough. Even the earliest white dwarfs, formed when the cosmos was young, have not had time enough to cool all the way down. The ember is real. Its final darkness remains, in a sense, only a prediction, waiting patiently on a clock longer than anything else you will ever be asked to imagine. You could sit beside a white dwarf, if you were somehow close enough and safe enough to do so, and watch nothing move at all. There is no flicker in it, no restless surface churning the way our own sun's does. Its light is even, unbroken, the visual equivalent of a long-held note, the last note of a song that finished playing a very long time ago and simply has not yet faded from the air. This is the fate waiting, billions of years from tonight, for a star very like our own, not violence, not disappearance, but a settling down into something small, dense, and steady, turning on in its orbit, faithfully warming whatever world might circle near it, only far more softly than before. Not every ending at the table is quite so faint. Some stars, far larger than the sun, do not settle into a white dwarf's low glow at all. When their cores finally give way, they do so all at once, in a supernova, a burst of light bright enough, briefly, to outshine every other candle nearby. And from that brightness, something stranger than a white dwarf can remain. A neutron star, where a white dwarf is Earth-sized, a neutron star is smaller still, no wider than a city, perhaps 20 kilometers across. And yet, it holds within that small span more mass than our entire sun. Here gravity has pressed so hard that even electrons and protons have been forced together into neutrons, packed edge to edge. Held up now not by the degeneracy of electrons, but by the degeneracy of neutrons themselves, another stubborn resistance, one layer deeper into the nature of matter. Some of these neutron stars spin. They spin because the star they came from was already turning, and as that vast original body collapsed down into something so small, the same turning motion that once took years to complete now takes only fractions of a second, the way a skater draws in her arms and turns faster, without any new effort, simply by becoming smaller. A neutron star that spins while sweeping a narrow beam of radiolight around itself is called a pulsar, and from far away, from a hillside like this one. That beam arrives as a series of steady pulses, on and off, on and off. A lighthouse turning somewhere impossibly far out on the dark water of space, faithful and unhurried, marking time long after the star that made it has finished all its burning. Some pulsars turn once every few seconds, others spin so quickly that they sweep their beam past us hundreds of times in a single breath, and yet every pulse arrives with the same unwavering rhythm, so regular that early listeners half wondered, for a moment, whether they had found a kind of clock built by someone else entirely. They had not. They had simply found a star that, in dying, learned to keep time. It is worth lingering here for a moment. At this emptied end of the table, even these are not violent things to us. Not from this distance, not tonight. A white dwarf is simply a small star settling into its long rest. A neutron star is simply matter finding a new, tighter way to hold itself together. Even the pulsar's beam, born from a burst of light so fierce it briefly outshone whole galaxies, reaches us now as nothing more than a low, rhythmic pulse, patient as a heartbeat heard through a wall. These are the candles that have already finished burning, and yet they hold warmth, hold shape, belong at the table, tucked in beside their brighter, younger neighbors. Nothing here has truly gone out. It has only grown hushed, in its own unhurried time, the way a room settles once everyone inside it has, at last, fallen asleep. Think of how far this whole family of embers has traveled to sit beside you tonight, in whatever form your mind can hold them. Some of their light has crossed years and years of open dark before ever finding your eye. And yet, they keep their places at the table without complaint, without needing to be the brightest thing there, useful simply by continuing to exist, by continuing to hold their shape against a darkness that would otherwise fill every space they occupy. There is something almost companionable in that thought, that even after the loudest part of a life is over, something can remain, warm and steady and unbothered, asking nothing more of the universe than permission to keep glowing a little longer. And perhaps, lying here on this hillside with all 7 kinds of candle now named and known to you, at least a little, the ember, the pulse, the giant, the ordinary yellow flame overhead, the small red ones sipping their fuel for trillions of years, and the ones that never quite caught fire at all, perhaps a small, drowsy question rises on its own. How did anyone come to know all this? How did a person standing on ground much like this one ever learn to read so much from such a distant, wordless light? Who first looked up, patiently, and began to listen to what the stars were quietly trying to say? The question lingers over the table like a note held a beat too long, and the answer, when it comes, is almost embarrassingly human. Someone simply looked. Not once, not quickly, but again and again, across generations, until looking itself became a kind of listening. Long before anyone had a word for hydrostatic balance, or a number for the distance to a red flame like Proxima, someone lay back on a hillside much like this one, and let their eyes rest on the same scattering of candles, trusting that patience would eventually be answered. You can let that trust settle into you now, because it worked. It always worked. The table did not need to be hurried into giving up its names. It began, in a way that still seems almost too plain to hold so much, with sunlight and a piece of glass. In the early 1800s, a German lensmaker named Joseph von Fraunhofer let ordinary daylight fall through a narrow slit and then through a prism, watching it spread into its familiar band of color, the way light always wants to unravel when it is asked to. But where earlier eyes had seen only a smooth rainbow, his eyes, patient and exact, found something more, hundreds of dark seams running through the color, faint absences where light should have been. He did not yet know that each seam belonged to a particular element, hydrogen or calcium or iron, each one absorbing its own narrow shade of sunlight before it ever reached his prism. He only knew the lines were real, and that they repeated, and that a flame's light, looked at closely enough, would always tell you what it was made of. It is a tender thought to carry towards sleep, that our star has been writing its own composition into every beam it sends us, and that someone, once, was unhurried enough to read it. Fraunhofer counted more than 500 of those dark seams before he finished, numbering them one by one as though he were taking a census of shadows, never once needing to know all their meaning before he trusted that meaning was there. Decades would pass before other hands, other prisms, matched each seam to its element, but the lines themselves waited, unbothered, exactly as he had left them, ready to be understood on their own schedule rather than his. That reading did not stay the work of one man at one prism for long. By the turn of the following century, it had grown into something larger and quieter still, a room at Harvard Observatory filled with women bent over glass photographic plates, each plate holding the captured spectrum of a distant flame, each woman tasked with the slow work of sorting starlight into families. They were called computers, back when that word named a person rather than a machine. And among them was Annie Jump Cannon, who over the years looked at the spectra of hundreds of thousands of stars, one faint smudge of light at a time, and found in all that variety a hidden order. She arranged them by the strength and pattern of their absorption lines, by how their light behaved rather than merely how bright they appeared, and out of that sorting came the very ladder we have been climbing tonight: O, B, A, F, G, K, M. The sequence of the candles on our table, from the fierce blue flame down through the small red one, set in an order that stands essentially unchanged, more than 100 years later. It is worth resting on that for a moment, a system built by careful eyes and steady hands, cataloging a whole sky's worth of light, plate by plate, without needing to rush a single one. Cannon herself was said to work through several hundred spectra some evenings, glancing at each faint photograph for only a few seconds before her mind, tuned by years of practice, placed it in its rightful spot along the ladder, and yet nothing about that pace ever felt like haste. It was simply what patience looks like once it has been practiced long enough to become fluent. A kind of fluency you might feel gathering in your own limbs right now, heavier and slower with every breath. Not long after, two other patient minds, Egnar Hertzsprung in Denmark and Henry Norris Russell in the United States, working separately, unaware at first of each other's labor, took that same sordid light and asked a further, gentler question. If you knew a star's color, its place on the ladder, and you also knew how bright it truly was, rather than how bright it merely looked from so far away, what would happen if you plotted every star you could measure on a single chart, temperature along one edge and true brightness along the other? What emerged, when they finally drew it, was something like a map of the whole table at once, most stars falling along a long diagonal band, the steady, fuel-sipping flames of the main sequence, with the swollen red giants curling away above and the small white embers settling quietly below. It is called the Hertzsprung-Russell diagram now, and it holds, even now unfussy and exact, everything we have wandered through tonight: the red dwarf and the yellow one, the blue giant and the giant it becomes, the ember it leaves behind, all resting together on one unhurried page. And then, decades later, came a discovery that owed everything to a kind of attention most of us never quite managed to sustain. In 1967, a graduate student in Cambridge named Jocelyn Bell Burnell was combing through nearly 100 feet of chart paper a night, printed output from a radio telescope she had helped build with her own hands, searching for the faint scintillation of distant quasars. Amid all that noise, she noticed something the equipment was never meant to show her: a small, stubborn, perfectly regular blip, arriving again and again, precise almost to the second. Most instruments would have called it interference and moved on. She did not. She kept watching, kept returning to that same faint pulse until it revealed itself as something entirely new. The lighthouse beam of a spinning neutron star, one of the very embers we sat beside only a little while ago, turning in place many times a second and sweeping its narrow signal across the whole dark table each time it came round. It is a strange comfort to think that the first pulsar was found not by a bigger telescope or a cleverer theory, but by someone refusing to look away from something small and repeating and easy to dismiss. From there, the watching only widened, though never lost its patience. Telescopes lifted above the blurring breath of our own atmosphere, Hubble first, drifting in its quiet orbit, then others after it, began returning images of stars and their nurseries in a stillness no ground-based eye could match. Each exposure built from hours of simply holding steady and letting the faintest light accumulate. And more recently, a spacecraft named Gaia has spent years doing something almost unimaginably careful, watching over 1 billion stars in our galaxy, tracking each one's tiny drift and flicker with such precision that it can measure the true distance to flames whose light we would otherwise only ever guess at. 1 billion candles, each one logged, each one placed, not through any single sudden triumph, but through years of unhurried, repeated looking, the same instrument returning to the same patch of sky again and again until the picture simply arrived. Notice, if you like, the pattern running under every one of these stories, quieter than any single discovery. None of them came from forcing an answer. Fraunhofer did not invent the dark lines. He waited long enough to see them. Cannon did not force an order onto the stars. She found the one already there, hiding in plain sight across plate after plate. Bell Burnell did not chase her pulsar. She simply let herself keep noticing it. The universe, it turns out, does not need to be interrogated. It only needs someone unhurried enough to sit across the table from it and let the light arrive in its own time, the way you are letting this last thought arrive in yours. The table is dimming now, the way a room dims when a hand rests over a lamp rather than switching it off, the 7 candles right where they were, burning exactly as they were, only easier to hold behind closed eyes than open ones. You do not need to watch them any longer. They will keep their places long after your attention wanders. The unlit ones cooling in their corner, the red dwarfs sipping their fuel by the trillion years, your own yellow flames steady overhead, the blue giants living their brief, brilliant lives, the giants swelling, the embers glowing low and faithful, each one exactly where the patient watchers found it and wrote it down so that you would never have to search for it yourself. All that is left now is the warmth of knowing the table is still there, unhurried, unchanging enough for one night, while everything in you settles the last small distance down toward rest. Tonight has been about a table in the dark, wide enough to hold every star you will ever see, and about learning, without any effort at all, what makes one flame gold and another blue. Tonight has been about the small, patient flames, the brown dwarfs that never quite caught, glowing faint and low in colors almost too dim to name, and the red dwarfs that will keep burning long after everything else on the table has gone dark, and the yellow ones, The ones like our own sun, steady and unremarkable, and endlessly generous with their light. Tonight has been about the great bright burnings, the blue giants that spend their whole fortune of fuel in a single reckless rush, and the red giants, swollen and unhurried, breathing outward into space in one long, tender exhale that will one day become the dust of something new. And tonight has been about the embers, the white dwarfs, cooling for eternities, the neutron stars spinning in the deep hush, and about the long, unbroken thread of people, priests and shepherds and sailors and children on rooftops, who looked up at this same table for thousands of years and, patiently, gave each candle a name. The way you might name something you loved without needing it to answer back. None of this needs anything from you tonight. You don't have to remember which flame was which, or which color belongs to which kind of star, or any of the words I use to describe them. The table will still be there tomorrow, unchanged, unbothered, burning exactly as it has for longer than any of us have been alive, whether or not you carry a single detail of it into the morning. Your only task, if it can even be called a task, was to lie here and let it happen around you, the way the light of these stars simply happens, without asking to be caught or held or understood. If your eyes are already closed, you can just let them stay that way. Another quiet exploration is already waiting on the screen, ready whenever you are, and you don't have to do anything at all to reach it. It will simply begin on its own, low and unhurried, like a second candle being lit from the first before the flame has even finished settling. And if some small, drowsy part of you is still awake enough to wonder, I'll leave you with just this one thought. Nothing to solve, nothing to answer, only something to loosen into as you drift. Which of the 7 candles on that table do you think is closest to the one warming you right now, tonight, from 93 million miles away? Let that question dissolve the way everything else has dissolved tonight. Feel the weight of the blanket, the give of the pillow, the faint hush of whatever room you're in. There is a table very far above you, 7 candles burning without hurry, without end, and none of them need you to keep watch. You can let go of the whole night now. You can let go of the sound of my voice, too, whenever you're ready. Let your breathing settle into its own long, easy rhythm, lower and longer, with every breath out, until there is nothing left to hold and nowhere left to be, but exactly here, warm, unhurried, safe. Sleep well.